Hey, cool kids. Welcome back to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I am your host, Greg Payne. I'm happy to have you joining me this week because we're talking with Allan Shedlin again. Now, Allan, if that name sounds familiar, was on the show probably a month or so ago talking about his experience with starting Dadvocacy Consulting Group. And so, what Allan is focused on is really making sure that dads have all the support that they need when it comes to raising their families and being the leaders of their families. What we're going to do this time around is talk about the Daddying Film Fest and Forum that's going to be held this April in Philadelphia. This is the fourth year that the Daddying Film Festival has been going on. So it's also referred to as D3F. And this is a great opportunity for elementary school kids all the way up to adults to be able to put together short films about their relationships with fathers and daddies, as well as being able to talk about caring dads and caring fathers. So we're going to get into a lot more of that as we get going, but we've also got some great stories as well. So you're going to enjoy this conversation. And if you have some young ones out there that would like to get a hold of maybe a cell phone or a tablet and shoot a short film about their fathers, this is a great opportunity to learn more about how they can go about creating a film, submitting a film, and even if they want to, be on the panel that will judge films by other young people as well as adults. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation. Allan, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. Again, you're the second time that we've had you on, and this is going to be a fun conversation. So I hope we have as much fun as we did on the first one.
I'm sure we will. I think another way we could describe it for you is it's double jeopardy. What can I say? Yeah, on our first conversation. It's wonderful.
Very much so. And as we get started with this one, I did want to ask you about your relationship with your grandfather. You had mentioned that you had memories of your mom's father. And so I'd love you to introduce him and help us get to know him a little bit and his background.
So he was known to me as Gramps. His actual name was Allan Hart, and Allan Hart was born in the United States. His father came over to the United States from Holland in 1870 as an 8-year-old father. And Allan was born here in Baltimore, then moved to New York and got married and had 2 children, my mother being one of them, and my uncle being the other one. And Allan was a businessman, not a very aggressive type businessman, kind of a passive businessman. He was I'm trying to think of the right word to describe him. I wouldn't say laid back, that's not quite the right word, but he was very quiet and very thoughtful. He worked in what was called in those days notions, which included things like buttons and stuff like that. And then he ended up also working with his son later on when his son became a lawyer and got into the real estate business. But I had obviously 2 grandfathers. My father's father I did not know well at all. As a matter of fact, he passed away when I was 18, and I think I had only seen him about 3 times in his life because he and my father were estranged from each other. So he was invited to 2 or 3 major family events, but that was him. So I didn't know him well, and I ended up discovering that I knew most about him when my father asked me to help him clean out his father's apartment after he had died. And I realized in doing that I found out more from, going through his stuff than I ever knew before, in a way that really has definitely influenced the way I'm a grandfather. I did not want my grandchildren to find out about me, sort of that kind of way. I also didn't know enough, Greg, in my opinion. I spoke about my maternal grandfather, but I didn't really know a lot about his deeper thoughts and how he felt about a lot of things because he was very reserved. And so again, I didn't want my grandchildren to think after I'm gone, like, I wonder what they thought about that. I wonder what, so I know that's one of the questions you have is how did it influence my own way of being a grandfather?
Oh, sure. And one of the things too that I like to dive into is even those early relationships that you have, because especially from your grandfather's generation, so much different now for fathers and grandfathers. So if you don't mind sharing us a little bit more about those early years, maybe with Gramps.
Well, I remember Gramps just being a quiet presence. His wife was much more domineering, and he was definitely took a backseat to her, and he was sort of always quiet in the background. One of the things there are two very specific things I remember about him. One is that he was president for a year or two of the congregation of the synagogue he belonged to. And so he attended services every Saturday. And after the services, he would come over. And I think he may have slept in a tie and jacket. I'm not sure. But he was very formal. And I remember him in a tie and jacket. It's actually interesting. I can't picture him not in a tie and jacket. But as part of his being on the dais, he always was given a carnation to wear in his lapel. And one of my memories of him is an olfactory memory of smelling the carnation, which is a pretty strong smell. So whenever I smell a carnation, I immediately think about him, which is kind of interesting to me. And the second thing is that he was probably the only person in my family who ever took any interest in what I studied. And, and he was, he would just ask me if he was there on a weekend, had I done my homework? And, what was the homework? And did I need any help with writing? Because he was good at that. Um, And I mean, he didn't take a giant interest, but he took some interest, and no one else took any interest. So it stood out as being probably more dramatic than it actually was.
Oh, sure. And did you have any special activities that maybe the two of you did together? I don't know, walk down to the corner and grab a paper or go for an ice cream or a sandwich or something?
No, we really didn't, other than when he came and would ask me about my homework, but that was about it. Wouldn't say I had a close relationship with any of my grandparents. A little bit closer with his wife, who outlived him by about 20 years. So as she got much older, I had a close relationship with her. He definitely had an influence on me just in terms of the way he was in his marriage. Also, he was very neat and very orderly. And he would say to me, when you come home from school and you take your jacket off, it doesn't take any more time or energy or effort to hang it up than it does to throw it on the couch. And I found myself saying the same thing to my daughter.
I think that's been the struggle of parents ever since jackets were invented.
Yes, exactly.
You know, I think there's old Babylonian texts of people going, "Why can't my kid hang up their coat?"
Exactly. Exactly. So, and he kept everything in order. And so I'm a lot like that. No.
And then how did that relationship start to help form, how you are as a grandfather and as a father and advocate for dads?
It's a good question, and it's a fair question. It's a little hard to answer because I'm not completely sure. But I think the calmness, and I don't know whether that's something you inherit, whether that's something genetic or it's just the way of being. So always, I only remember once getting angry and raising his voice, only once, and it was his wife. So I think it informed a little bit of my own marriage relationship in terms of how I was and wasn't. But I think, I very, very rarely raise my voice. And I'm calm most of the time. And that not only has served me well as a dad and as a granddad, but also served me particularly well when I was a school principal.
Oh, I absolutely. I did my first job as a substitute teacher for first grade last week, and I went in there just bracing myself for what was to come. Turned out it was a great experience, but I think definitely having a little bit more calmer perspective and attitude helps a lot when you're working with little kids.
Yeah, no, absolute. So I think and also that I wanted to be around him and I wanted him to be around. So I think that also was important. I guess I felt that I could also, if I had an issue, come to him with it. He was one of the few people I felt I could do that with. So I guess I'm not deliberately conscious of doing that and modeling that, but I think it's part of my grandfatherly DNA, maybe.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, and especially that having that mindset, that attitude of I want to be somebody the kids want to be around. I think it is big because then that helps you look for those little opportunities to connect, those little opportunities just to be there and be present so that they do feel invited to be in your space.
Yes, and there isn't one other thing that I think about because I just actually remembered this now. It came back to me. So he had a good sense of humor, but I called it a reluctant good sense of humor. He didn't know whether it was proper to have a good sense of humor and to kid around, and he also liked to play with words a lot, which I love to do. But he he gave me a check, I think, when I graduated from high school, and the check was written. It was written out for $1 million, and it was signed, "I am kidding." So, that's just, and I'm remembering, and I actually have this right here on my desk, which I'm going to show you. One of my grandchildren, I have 5 grandchildren. They're all older now, 18 to 27 years old. And my middle granddaughter saw this little plaque in a store and she bought it and she gave it to me and she said, "Gramsci." And so that's how I know Gramsci. "Gramsci, I had to get this for you." And here's what he said.
Grandpas are there to help children to get into mischief that they hadn't thought of yet. I love it.
Yeah, so that's what Jesse said to me. "Gramsci, this is made for you. They must have known you."
You know that's awesome. And then also, I've got a question for you too, which is how has your relationship changed with the adult children since you became a grandparent?
I think that's a really, really important question. And I hope all grandfathers and grandmothers as well think about this. So one of the things that I talk about when I do my groups with dads is that the instant you become a father, your identity is changed forever. The instant you've never been a father before, that's fine. And you are instantly a generation older. As a grandfather, your identity is changed again. Um, and you not only instantly become a generation older, but you instantly have something in common with your child that you never had in common with them before. And that is that you're both parents. So if your relationship as a consequence of those two things doesn't change, it means you're not dealing with the reality of what just happened. And I do remember, and I've written something about this, about my thoughts at the imminent birth of my first grandchild, 27 years plus 27 years ago. And I was taking a train from the DC area up to New York where she was about to be born. And, there are times of our lives where we remember those very specific thoughts. And I'm sitting on that train. It's about a 4 hour, little under 4 hour train ride. And I'm thinking all about this and I'm all excited. And I think to myself, one of the great things about this is I'll be a grandfather now. So not so much a father anymore. Was I wrong? Boy, was I wrong. So it's just changed. I would hope for all of us, it changes that relationship a lot. In my case, because I was a very present and active dad, I don't think that there was a worry, as there often is, because, one of the things that I like to think about and I guess share with people is we talk a lot about child development. We don't acknowledge or talk as much about adult development. I was a different person when my grandchild was born than I was when that daughter was born. And so often, in my case, I was a young grandfather. So I was still fully employed. I'm still fully working all those years later. But often grandparents have a lot more time available and are not, in the midst of their careers where they're building their careers and so forth. So they have more time to devote to being a grandparent. And sometimes my experience has been, happily not in my own case, but I've, in my work, have discovered a lot of grandparents who said to me, my kid is really angry at me. Like, why wasn't I available like this when they were growing up? So I think it provides an opportunity for us to have those kind of discussions and to explain it. The other thing that definitely happened is there's a much greater understanding from your children about some of the decisions you made, which they didn't necessarily agree with or like very much when they were little, but now they think, now I get it. Now I understand why when you read me my bedtime story every night, you fell asleep.
Right.
So that there are things like,
I love it. It's interesting too that I think sometimes there's got to be a little bit of a healing process that goes on both ways. That when the younger children hit that early adult phase and they start to see like, how come you weren't always at every event that I had going on, and how come you weren't doing these things? That it's a little bit of a recognition of, hey, I was trying to provide for the family. Maybe I had a business trip I had to go on. Maybe I had to do these things. And then as they get a little bit even further along their life journey, they realize like, oh yeah, sometimes, missing a recital is something that a father has to do. That, it doesn't mean we care any less, but it means that, hey, we're doing what we have to do to put a roof over the head and food on the table and that sort of thing.
well, and I think that's a really good point. I'd also, in addition, say that my former wife had a full-time job. Actually, her job took her out of the country a lot. As a school principal, that did not happen for me. Yes, there were board meetings and there were parent meetings and there were all sorts of things. Plus, my school was 60 miles from where I lived, so there was a rather large commute and all of that. So yes, I did have to miss, and there were 3 kids. So, you just can't do that. But I remember my youngest daughter saying to me, when she was a senior in high school, I was no longer a school principal. I was running the National Elementary School Center. And during those years, I did have to do some travel. And she was, at that point, a senior in high school, the only one of the 3 daughters home. And she said to me, Dad, it's really lucky you didn't have that job while we were little. And I said, Christina, it wasn't lucky. I would never have taken a job like this when you were little. It was deliberate that I had a job that I knew that I wasn't going to travel and that I would be home and I would be able to attend not everything you did, because Lord knows that wasn't possible, but some of what you did, and as much as I could. So I think to your point, that's just a different kind of understanding as they get older about the decisions you make and why you made those decisions.
Oh, yeah. And hopefully the foundations of the relationship are there to heal any hurt feelings and get to that point of understanding, because it's natural when you're 12 years old and your dad misses the little league game that you almost hit a home run, to be frustrated that why weren't you there? But as you get older, it's like, okay, I can let that frustration go. Now, I would like to pivot over and talk to you about the Daddying Film Festival and Forum, or the D3F. So, as part of the Daddying Advocacy Consulting Group that you started about 3 years ago or so, you added a film festival component to it, and I'd love for you to talk to us about what led into adding that film festival.
Of course, I'm happy to talk about this. It's really my primary focus now, other than my focus as a grandparent. Just as it's sort of a segue into that in terms of the difference in the relationship I have with my grandchildren now that they are, the youngest is 18, the oldest is 27, and three of them are in sort of helping professions at this point, which is how I've spent my whole life. And so there's a different kind of understanding from them about what I do, what I did, what I do. And there's almost, well, there is an opportunity to talk to them also professionally. So I'm actually in the midst right now of writing my first commentary piece together with my 27-year-old granddaughter. She's a clinical social worker. And we're writing a piece, which we'll talk about another time, called Empathy Overload. That's what the topic is. So that's just a whole other thing to actually be collaborating with her on a written piece. As far as the advocacy consulting group, which started a number of years back, and it was kind of an outgrowth of me being suggested to me literally 1994, so 30 years ago, that I write a book on fathering. So I'm a bit of a smartass. My response was, fathering isn't a book. Fathering is a paragraph. It's a one-time biological act requiring zero commitment, just a shot of DNA. I like to criticize, and I think we talked about this in the first time we spoke. Daddying could be a book, and it's what happened when nurturing and fatherhood intersect. It's a lifelong commitment. And so I have written a good deal on education, but had not written anything about being other than being a daddy. And so I thought, how would I begin doing that? Well, first I would reference myself as a dad, and then as a son, and then as a grandson. And then I'd also reference myself according to how a 4-year-old described my job as a school principal. And he said, I think your job is you're like the daddy of the school. The best definition of my job ever. And so I started interviewing, doing focus groups with kids as the consumers of daddying in order to write this book. And then I started interviewing dads and granddads. Right now, the total is 205 one-on-one interviews with dads as young as 16 and this oldest 104 in 20 different countries. So there's a lot of stuff. And so the book proposal 20 years ago, 21 years ago, got rejected by 8 publishers. And I had spent a good deal of time doing the research, doing the writing, putting the proposal together. And to say I was disappointed would be an understatement. And the soulful sadness that came out of too many of those interviews had me convinced that I couldn't just not do something to address that. And so if the book wasn't going to fly 21 years ago, I didn't know what to do with all of the information and mainly the feelings I had that I needed to address the sadness. And I saw a movie. and this is in 2003. It was one of the three nominees as Best Documentary, one of the three Academy Award nominees as Best Documentary. I highly recommend it. It's called My Architect, A Son's Journey. And it was a film created by Nathaniel Kahn about his father, Louis Kahn, who was the most famous architect I had known. And he was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he didn't know much about his dad. And 25 years after his dad passed away, he decided he wanted to find out about his dad, and he would do it by not only studying the buildings that he had done, very important buildings, the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California, the capital of Bangladesh, many buildings at Yale, a lot of major buildings. And so he would interview also the people who commissioned the buildings. And what he ended up finding out about his father was incredible. I won't spoil it because it's an amazing story. And I was seeing the movie alone, and I found myself crying through at least half of it. And when it was all over, I wasn't sure I could stand up. I was so emotionally taken with it. And I read all the credits, and then I had the courage to try to stand up. I was able to. But I thought about why did it nail me like it did. I thought about finding Nathaniel Kahn and giving him a hug because he really needed one. And then the third thing I thought about, and this really gets to the Daddy Film Festival, is I thought about I wished my father was watching the movie with me, because we could have used the movie to talk about issues that came up in the movie that would have been very difficult for me spontaneously to just bring up. Hey, Dad, I've been meaning. So we could talk about the movie. And so that was the idea back in 2003, to do a film festival using movies for that purpose, to encourage discussions between fathers or father figures and their kids. And I have ADD. I got distracted for 17 years. And used film in a way, using film did a lot of father groups, the World Bank, Indian Pueblos, and the penitentiary, and Head Start centers, just in a lot of different settings. And 3 years ago, before this white beard came in, I was still shaving. And this old guy was looking back at me in the mirror, and he said, Allan, you're not getting any younger. What happened to that film festival? So 3 years ago, it was born. I should add, I knew nothing about film festivals. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. And one of my mantras is leap and a net shall appear. I did know somebody who knew something about festivals. So in that first year in 2023, I partnered with the Coalition for Quality Children's Media based in New Mexico. We created an all virtual Danny Film Festival. We called it the Kids First. That was the name of the organization. Its fuller name is the Coalition, but for Quality Children's Media. But it's also known as Kids First. So we called it the Kids First Studying Film Festival. And I learned a lot. A lot to learn. I also learned how much I don't know. I still don't know a lot. But I was blown away that we had films submitted from 17 countries. And the films were submitted by kids at 4 different school levels: elementary school, middle school, high school, and undergraduate college. And we trained other students to judge the films. And we narrowed it down to 10 semifinalists in each of those 4 age groups. And in that first year, there was one prompt, and it was a letter to my father or father figure. That was the theme. And after the 10 semifinalists were identified by the students, we sent them to people in the film industry, educators and clinicians. And we said, please narrow the 10 down to 5. And each of the 5 earn $250 finalists, and then we put them online for a week. And the world voted on what was the best in each of those categories. And the winner received another $250. Sorry about the phone ringing, the other phone now. But they did not receive a Oscar or a Golden Globe. They received an Atticus. And the Atticus is based on the character Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, who it is kind of agreed is the best portrayal of a father figure in literature and the movies. And so the physical award is two mockingbirds, a daddy mockingbird and a baby mockingbird, mounted on a pedestal. And then that was year one. And then in year two, we started getting responses from adults saying, I've done a film that has a theme, father, and can I submit my film? And so we decided that would be fine. And it wasn't just dads, by the way. It was mothers as well who were submitting films on that theme. And we added a couple of categories. And we decided, because of the quality of what was coming in, we decided that we'd add a live version, a half-day live version, where we would show the film and we would invite parents and their kids to come in and talk about the issues that came up in the film, going way back to the original idea from 20 plus years earlier. And so last year we did our second live version. First year, the live version was done in New Mexico. Last year was done in Philadelphia. This year will be done in Philadelphia as well. And last year we received films from 26 different countries. Wow. Which just continues to blow me away. So that's kind of the story of what happened. There are 3,000 film festivals every year around the world. There is none that focuses on this topic. And there's certainly none that both focuses on the topic and has children and students as the primary initial judges. They don't judge the films submitted by adults. And I'm very careful about how I say that. Notice I didn't say they don't judge the adult films, because it's a kind of festival which we're not yet involved.
Yeah, and that would get us into a whole bunch of trouble if we're having kids doing judging on those. So yeah. I do want to ask you about the circle of friends that you had and the people that helped support and helped you get this up and going. If you could talk to us a little bit about them.
Yeah, so it's this is all very evolutionary, if you will. We learn something every year, both what to do and what not to do. And we have been building a circle of friends. And the circle of friends are organizations, national and international organizations, that have a reason to think it's important to talk about greater father involvement. And what you do as a member of the circle of friends is you agree to get the word out to your network and to be supportive of the film festival. You allow us to use your logo so it looks like, and it is true that there are people very interested and supportive of it. And last year, one of the organizations, it's a wonderful, wonderful organization called Equimundo, started in Brazil, but its now main office is in the DC area. And their focus is on gender equity, but they also have a particular focus on men caring. And so we sponsored an additional category last year, and it was the men caring category. So, for instance, one of the films that was submitted in that category was by an adult, and it was a film that told the story of a son who did not have a very good relationship with his father. But at the end of his father's life, and the son, now an adult, probably in his 50s, decided that he was going to take care of his father in the waiting years. And so it's stuff like that. So they sponsored an award and kicked in $500 for the person who won that particular category. So there is, Equimundo, there's the All-American High School Film Festival, which is the largest film festival in the world for high school kids, very large. Um, and there's another organization, Parent Camp, and then we've had the film office in Albuquerque in the state of New Mexico and Santa Fe and Philadelphia, now in Maryland, who also, and so again, it's getting the word out. And so we expect there'll be lots more people submitting films as people hear about the film festival.
That's awesome. We'll go into the contact information and stuff later, but if people are interested in becoming a friend, I imagine they just reach out and, hey, I'm interested. I've heard about this.
Yes, no, and that would be wonderful because the more the word gets out about it, the more films are going to be submitted and the more people are going to pay attention to the importance of greater father involvement, which is what it's about, as well as the issues. So not all of the films have a happy ending. It's kind of interesting, Greg, when we did the training with the kids, the students, and the students are the same age range as the festival, so it's elementary school through undergraduate college, is the first thing that I do. And we initially did a one-shot training, where we had 20 kids on the Zoom. I now do it differently, so it's now kind of individual, or if you do it with a friend, it may be two kids at the same time. And I usually begin by asking them, what's the latest film they've seen? And often it's, either a Marvel, superhero thing or a Disney film. And I say, okay, you have that in your mind, now get it out of your mind. Because the kind of films that are coming in are done by kids like you. They don't have a multi-million-dollar budget. They're probably using their mobile phone to do this. So be gentle, and we have a protocol of questions that they answer so they know what to look for. One of the nice things we've learned is that at the high school level, some of the kids get community service hours because they volunteered to do this. And it's pretty gentle process. Most of the kids' films are under 10 minutes. So what we tell them is their commitment is a minimum of 2 films a month. So that's maybe 10 minutes to see the film and maybe 10 minutes to judge the film. And or other requirement is if you can't honor doing it in the week after we send you the film, you just need to tell us that I have a homework assignment. Something came up. I can't do it in time for the week turnaround. And you just have to tell us so we don't need to hunt you down because we don't really have much of a staff. Yeah. So we are always looking for more kids to do it. I mentioned it was a minimum of 2 a month, but a lot of the kids want to do anything more than that because they're kind of interesting. So yeah, we're looking for more kids to be judges, but also to submit films.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that's something good. As I'm talking with people around here, maybe some of the high schools that do like a film or media group or something, I'll mention it and maybe those high school kids might be interested in helping out and being a judge or critique some of the films.
Well, even that first grade class, because our youngest judge last year was 8, and actually the first year, the winner at the elementary level was an 8-year-old kid. Last year was a 10-year-old from Singapore who will be one of our judges this year too. So the kids who've had the experience sometimes become judges and they really have a much better idea about what to look for.
Oh, that's awesome. And Allan, what has been some of the biggest surprises that you've had during the festival's first 3 years?
Well, I guess the biggest surprise is how many countries have submitted films. That's the biggest surprise, which just tells me that the issue is important around the world. So that's been a surprise. The enthusiastic response from the judges has also been fascinating to me, how much they really get into it, and the quality of the films and the poignance of some of the issues that have been raised are pretty amazing. As a matter of fact, the film that won last year in the undergraduate category was done by a senior graduate from San Jose State University, and it was part of her final project. And the film is called, it's either 5 or 7 minutes long. It's called A Trace. And it's a film that deals with the absence of a father and her working through, it's animated, brilliantly animated, working through understanding that's not something that she needs to be embarrassed about. And it's not her fault, but it's also just dealing with the issue of how do you deal with it when you wish your dad was around, but he's an absent father. And by the way, that young lady is our, other than the person who helps, who I mentioned earlier, Scott Beller, who helps with the communications part. She is now our first employee. And she is going to be the associate director of this year. Um, and getting a stipend because it's something that's the other big thing we're going to be looking for now. Now that this is year 4, we have a little bit of a track record and we're not a one-time thing. And so we are very interested in attracting some funding so that a couple of us get to sleep maybe 6 hours instead of 4.
That'd be great. And I love how this thing is growing. We talked a little bit about students critiquing, but are there any other ways that students that are interested in the festival but don't want to submit film or video can become involved and help you guys out?
Yeah, well, certainly the judging, is as critiquing or judging is the other way. If they were local to the festival, which again will be this year in Philadelphia again, we kind of had decided, because one of the things we've learned about film festivals is that the really successful ones are always in the same location every year. And around the same time of year, almost always exactly the same time of year. Initially, one of our thoughts was to move the film festival around from state to state in order to also advance the film industry in that particular state and call attention to it. But after year 1, it's one of those many things we continue to learn, to have to create a brand new network every year in a new state and learn the culture of that particular state is an unnecessary burden. And so at the moment, we're quite committed to staying in Philadelphia. It's appropriate for a lot of reasons. It's where the founding fathers signed the convention, the Constitutional Convention. And what we said last year is for the day of the festival, we changed the city of brotherly love to the city of fatherly love. We have changed them from the founding fathers to the founding daddies. And our illustration is of John Adams, George Washington, and Ben Franklin wearing snugglies and their babies and smiling.
Boy, I love that. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is what's the timelines, what's the calendar like for this year and going into 25?
So it's the timing of this discussion you and I are having is perfect because November 18th is the day that we are opening submissions of films. We usually let people know within a month as to whether or not their film is a finalist or is a semi-finalist, has been accepted into the film festival for judging. How do people find out about this? There is something called Film Freeway, which if you are a filmmaker, you know of. And on our website, there's a link directly to it. It's very, very simple. So you know about it. That's how people from 26 countries find out. It is a little bit of word of mouth, but mainly it's you go to Film Freeway, which lists every single film festival. And every week there's a new one. So whether it's, one on film festival about the environment or film, it's all of these small film festivals that exist. You submit through Film Freeway. The earlier you submit, so the festival itself will take place on April 20th in Philadelphia. We'll close submissions at the end of March. Every film festival that exists, with the exception of ours in the first year, charges people for submitting their film. Since it was just kids submitting their film the first year, despite the advice I was given by our partner that first year, who said, Allan, you have to charge. Everybody charges. And I said, we're not everybody, and it's for kids. We're not charging. The second year, we decided, for lots of reasons, that it was a good idea to charge something. You're more likely, even if you're only paying $5 to submit your film, you're more likely to follow through. So that's what we charged, $5. We also tell people that if for any reason the fee is too much for you, just tell us and we'll waive the fee for you. So the earlier you submit, the less it costs to submit, because otherwise everybody's going to wait till that last week, and then we're not going to be able to manage, screening them all and judging them. So that's the timeline to begin November 18th. The reason that we're doing it that early is because it's also just before Thanksgiving vacation, Christmas break, and so forth. So it gives plenty of time for kids when they're not in school to be creating their films.
Okay. And is this looking ahead to 25 and 26? Is the timeline going to be roughly the same? So if somebody hears us in the summer of 25, would they be looking to, I should have something together by November?
Yeah. Again, it evolves. There are people who are saying, Allan, why are we waiting until April? It's a crazy time of year. I mean, first year, the live version was in June in New Mexico. We discovered that was a big mistake, especially in New Mexico where schools are done at the end of May. And so a lot of families were out of town in June. Last year in Philadelphia, we did it in May. We weren't smart enough to look at what the geography was and discovered that all of the main universities, and there were a lot of them in the Philly area, all at graduation that same weekend, we were doing the film festival, and there was a rowing regatta for high school kids. That was not a good idea either. So this year it's April, and we think we've been checking out things like spring break, Easter, Passover, all the different holidays and so forth. So April 26th seems to be that one weekend sweet spot where there aren't those things to consider. We'll probably learn that we forgot about. So I'd say that it probably will remain in the springtime, but exactly when, we're not sure. But sure, anybody wants to work during the summer on a film, and that's a perfect time to do it. We're also thinking of adding a component of helping kids learn how to make film, but that's down the road a piece that it ain't gonna happen right away.
Sure. And as we start to wrap up, let's just review the categories again, because I think you've added one for this year. So if you can run us through the categories, that'd be great.
So again, the age categories are elementary, middle, high school, and undergraduate college, and then the separate categories for the adults. But the categories, the prompts, if you will, there are 6 of them for this year. The first one is the original one, which was a letter to my dad, granddad, or father figure. And by the way, all of these have an opposite. So if adults want to submit a film, it's a letter to my child, my grandchild, my bonus child. The second is the most joyful or fun thing I ever did with my dad, granddad, or father figure, or wish I could have done. The third is if I could make one wish come true from my dad, granddad, or father figure, what would it be? Again, the opposite if you're dad, your kid. The fourth is my daddy dream, the most positive relationship I could imagine having with my dad, granddad, or father figure. The fifth is men caring, which is a repeat of the equivalent of sponsored that really is celebrating men who play nurturing or fatherly roles, inspire and positively impact the lives of children and youth. Examples might be foster fathers, adoptive dads, granddads, older siblings, coaches, big brothers, etc. And then the new category for this year is granddads and dads, lessons learned from each other. That's this year's new category. We already have ideas for next year. So those are the categories. And all of this is on our website, which is daddyfilmfest.com.
Okay. Okay. And Allan, as we wrap up, was there anything around the Dadding Film Festival or even your grandfather's that I didn't ask you that you'd like to talk about?
Well, just mention, because when we talked about preparing for this, one of the things you asked was are there any particular films that you remember and that stand out to you? And the reason for sharing a couple of them is just to give people ideas of the kind of things they could write, they could make a film about. So one was the one I mentioned, Trace, which is an animated film about a child coming to grips with the fact that her father isn't around and isn't going to show up. And for her, the definition of family was she and her mom, and that was enough. So that's one that definitely stands out. Another one and that's from the U.S. Another one that's stood out, maybe my favorite from the year so far is called Dad for Hire, and it's submitted from Australia. And it's a wonderful, with good Australian kind of down under humor. It's a father being interviewed by his 18-month-old daughter for the job of being her father. Very amusing the way it's done, but it's also very serious because when they get into, oh, so part of my job is I need to change your nappy, your pamper whenever it's wet. I need to feed you snacks whenever you're hungry. I need to. And by the way, what's my salary? How many vacation days do I get? And so forth. And it's just very sweet. It's only about 5 minutes long. So that's, and then the third one that come to my mind came from Argentina, and that's called Mi Otro Hijo, my other son. And it's also happens to be animated, this one, brilliantly animated. And it's done by a father who is an animator, actually. It's his own story, whose second son is born with Down syndrome. And he describes him as his other son and hasn't really incorporated and dealt with the fact that, he's just as important as his firstborn son, and how he learns that lesson. And mainly it's his older son who teaches him the lesson. And it's very, very poignant. And it's a wonderful film.
Wow. Can people still watch the ones that might be a year or two old? Are those still available on your website by chance?
A number of them are. We haven't received permission from everybody who's made the films to do that, or their films may be, owned by somebody other than them at this point. And maybe it's a final thing to say. So last year, we considered, I mean, we've looked at every year with the kind of films we get, but last year we had a film submitted to us that was submitted before it was submitted to the Sundance Film Festival, and it won the audience favorite documentary award at Sundance. The good news for them, it was then purchased by Netflix. So that was really good news for them because it's documentary done by a nonprofit, or I prefer to refer to it as a social profit organization. But it meant that they had to give up ownership of their film because they didn't own it anymore.
Right.
But we lucked out, and we were able, through the cleverness of the woman who made the film, or whose idea was to do the film, that we could show it at our festival. without having the blessing necessarily of Netflix. And it is a film that I highly recommend. It is available on Netflix. It's a full-length documentary film about girls who want to have a closer relationship with their fathers. Their fathers happen to be in prison. And the way to go about it is to stage a dance in the prison. And so half of the film focuses on the girls getting ready and all excited about having a dance with their dads. But the other half is focused on the dads having to take a course in responsible fatherhood in order to qualify to be able to be part of this dance. And I guarantee you there is not a single person who's just heard about this film called Daughters, not a single person who will not cry when they see this movie. Good tears. Good tears.
Good, good. Yeah, and I'll be sure to put a link to that. Even if people don't have Netflix, they can at least look at the IDBM,
Yeah,
write up or whatever on that.
right. The IMDb, they can do that, and the trailer will be there. It's definitely must see, in my opinion. As I said when we introduced Angela Patton, is the woman who did the TED Talk about the film 12 years ago, or now I guess 13 years ago. I said if we were in the position of making a film rather than just screening films, that's the film that I would have been so proud to make, because it not only talks about it from the standpoint of the kids, but from the standpoint of the dads.
Yeah, yeah. That's. I'm now looking forward to running downstairs and checking out Netflix and taking a look at that.
Yeah, you'll love it. You'll love it. I promise. But have tissues handy.
Will do. Will do. Well, Allan, this has been a blast having you back on the Cool Grandpa podcast. Thank you so much. And I'll be sure to put a link to our previous conversation into here, as well as the links to some of the other things that we were talking about. So it'll make it easy.
And when they go into the website, not only just gave the website for the film festival, but we could also put on the website to the advocacy consulting group, because then they can see the blog that you wrote very recently.
Oh, that was a great opportunity. I really enjoyed having that experience.
Yeah, so we're also happy to entertain other people who may look at some of the blogs and may want to contribute a blog of their own. So let me end with this, Greg, if I can. So we just met as a group of people who are working on this to better define exactly what the mission of D3F, and D3F, which you referred to at the beginning, is really very simple. It's the Daddying the Film Festival and Forum, 3Fs. So it's easier to say D3F than the Daddying Film Festival and Forum. So its mission is to provide students, dads, and dad figures and independent filmmakers a creative platform to promote the importance of father involvement in its presence and its absence. It enables filmmakers of all ages and levels of experience to explore their thoughts and feelings about the complex relationships between fathers and their children. So there are 4 other sentences, but that's enough of a mouthful and sort of thing for us to sort of integrate.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, Allan, this has been an absolute blast, and I look forward to having you back on in the future. And maybe I'll even sneak up to Philadelphia for the film festival. Who knows?
That would be a great thing if you could do that, because the other thing we do, as I mentioned, is that after we screen the films, we break into small discussion groups and we talk about, what was the main theme and, your own experiences. So I could see you, Greg, leading one of those discussion groups. So you'd be really good at it. So that would be cool.
I'd love to do that. Any excuse to make my way up north is a good one.
Yes, good. All right. Thank you so much for inviting me and talking about this passion project. let's make it grow and grow.
Absolutely. And I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Cool Grim.
Thanks. All right, cool kids. You heard Allan and I sitting down and having a great conversation about the Daddying Film Fest and Forum. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you found it was informative. I've got links to the movies that we were referencing into the show notes, or if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to have those down in the comments section so you can check those out. But I hope you are stimulated to maybe think about putting together a short video of yourself, creating your own movie, creating your own content around what being a dad is all about. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Allan. Stay tuned. We're going to be doing a lot more together, I think, in the coming year. And be sure to share this with any family and friends that would enjoy learning more about the Dadvocacy Consulting Group, as well as the Daddying Film Fest and Forum. So until next time, remember to stay cool.